So Catherine and I decided we'd do a little video today on just focusing on maple and specifically curly maple and how it relates to gun stocks and specifically those gun stocks from flintlocks and percussion era rifles. During the flintlock and percussion era in this country, maple was the predominant stock wood. It was probably used 95% of the time. It was very, very popular, and it is a very good stock wood. One of the reasons why it's so sought after, or it was so sought after as a stock wood, is because of the curl and the figure. So that's something that we will talk a little bit more in depth of, is the nature of the curl that you see in maple. So the primary species of maple used in gun stocks is red maple and sugar maple. That is, of course, in this country. I believe in Europe there's a field maple that was used some, but in this country, red maple and sugar maple. Red maple produces curl a lot more frequently than sugar maple, and generally produces more vivid curl. So red maple is not the kind of the burgundy red leafed maple trees that you might see planted. That's actually a Norway maple. So red maple is the type of maple that forms the kind of the bright crimson leaves in the fall. Interestingly enough, Norway maple is a fine stock wood as well, and it's considered a hard maple. So if we look at this board here, it's what's known as a live edge slab or live edge board. That means that it hasn't been trimmed along the edge, hasn't been edged. And if you get the light right, even though it's not planed, you can kind of distinguish between the saw marks and the curl. So in the scheme of things, that board is curled pretty strongly. It's a pretty good board. So when we produce gun stocks, we have to hunt far and wide to find very good curly maple. And it just so happens that we have a very good stock of pretty nice curly maple right now, and that's what prompted us to do the video, to talk about it a little bit more. We enjoy it a whole bunch, and so it's pretty easy for us to talk about and fun to share. So basically what curl is if you think about wood as being a collection of straws that run lengthwise along the grain, very small straws. Those straws are actually not straight, but they're kind of bent, and you can think of maybe as a wavy fashion, or maybe like a sine wave. Now, interestingly enough, it's not just in one dimension. So those straws are actually bent in three dimensions. That's why you can see that curl not just on one face or orientation. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but we'll go into that maybe a little bit more. So looking at this board again, it happens to be red maple. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. One key way in identifying a tree that has curl is to look at the surface of the log directly below the bark. And in this case, you can see the ripples, I believe. You can peel a little bit more off maybe too. So here's some more ripples. So when we're trying to find logs that have curl, this is a key indicator. And it just so happens that in the springtime, the bark will slip off the logs easier, and that's when a lot of the logs are identified as being curly, because it becomes much more evident. So not only the surface of the tree directly below the rough exterior bark is wavy, but the bark surface itself. So here's a piece that peeled off the edge of one of these slabs. So it should be noted that curl might not run entirely through the tree. It might be on one side of the tree, it might not be on the other. It might be only at the base of the tree, low near the roots, due to what's called compression curl. And it might not extend from the exterior all the way to the interior of the tree as well. So you have to be careful in identifying, picking out good trees. So back to talking a little bit more about about the wavy grain. If I pull up a piece here, you can probably see that a little bit more vividly. This is a piece of well-curled maple that split. This is probably from the logging operation when it split. And it's real interesting, at least for me. You can kind of see what the surface looks like, what those little fibers look like. If you look closely, you can even see some of these little fibers, I believe. And you can see that this has a three-dimensional topography. So it's not just wavy in one dimension. And it's not just like a simple sine wave either. There's shape to it. And that shape basically influences how the figure looks once the board is planed. So once the board is sawn or planed, you're basically cutting through this irregular shape. And what that basically creates is some areas where there's long grain or straight grain, and some areas where there's more end grain. So the orientation of the grain relative to your surface is what creates the appearance of the stripes or the irregular figure in maple. I've heard some people say that it's hard and soft grain. That's a fallacy. It has nothing to do with it being hard and soft. The stripes aren't harder than the other area. It's just a different grain orientation is all it is. And those stripes, since they might be more end grain, may not cut as easily with, say, a chisel. But that doesn't mean it's any harder or softer in the stripes. It has nothing to do with that. A little bit more in detail also is the amplitude of the waviness will make a big difference in how vivid the curl is. So in trying to find maple, you look for wood that has higher amplitude to the waviness, and then it'll be more dramatic, a more intense curl.
Can you flip that? Because the other side kind of shows what it is. To get a feel for how.
So one of the difficulties with maple is it's primarily the sapwood only is used in gun stocks. Now sometimes a little bit of the heartwood is used, and it often depends on the nature of the heartwood. But in general, most gun stocks come from primarily sapwood. The heartwood will vary, depending on the tree. Sometimes the heart will be a small percentage of the total diameter of the tree. Sometimes it'll be a large percentage of the total diameter of the tree. Sometimes the heartwood will be pretty light in color and be much more similar and characteristic to the sapwood. And sometimes the heartwood will be dark and very, very nasty and prone to cracking and not really suitable. So here's an example of that shows some heartwood. And by heartwood, what we're referring to is the wood nearest the center of the tree. So if you can see this kind of lighter colored wood near the center of this board. Down here it probably shows it quite well. That's some heartwood. So that'll be nearer the center of the tree. Now this, even though it's fairly dominant in color on this particular board here, the difference between the sapwood and the heartwood, when it's planed, there'll be a lot less noticeable difference in color. And you can dip into that a little bit with the stock blank. We try to avoid it, but we sometimes end up having a little bit of heartwood in it, and it doesn't cause any problems. Sometimes customers get very afraid or very scared when they see a variation in color in the stock, but these stalks are generally stained, and when you stain them, you really don't see any that significant difference in color. So it's kind of inconsequential unless the heart is very, very nasty, which we stay away from. So speaking of some nasty colored heart, this would be an example of some heart that's dark. And this is the kind of thing that we try to avoid because it's prone to having cracks. It seems the drying characteristics of the heart are different than the drying characteristics of the sapwood sometimes, and cracks will develop at that juncture between the sapwood and the heartwood. So that can be very frustrating and problematic. But the darker colored heartwood is certainly more of a problem. So moving on here to some more characteristics of maple that can be sometimes a little problem is this is often called ambrosia maple, and you can see these streaks. And they're not mineral streaks. You hear some people call them mineral streaks, but they're from a beetle, the ambrosia beetle. It bores in I guess it's a worm. I'm not exactly sure, but it bores in the wood, and part of its excrement, I guess, somehow something it puts off, excretes, stains the surrounding wood. So you can see a little wormhole, and then you can see the stains surrounding it. Some people like that in wood for furniture and so forth, but it's usually a little less desirable in gun stocks. Different parts of the country are more problematic for this to occur. If further north, it seems to occur less. I know in some areas like southern Indiana, soft maple has it almost all the time, called flagworm as well. And you can often see it in the end grain too of a log, although I don't know if we can see it on this one or not. Yeah, I think you can see those streaks, kind of this dark streak right along there. Other woods will make curl too. Associated with the long rifle gun stock don't make curl near as much as maple. So like cherry will curl some, walnut will curl some, but it's not very frequently as compared to maple. And the curl is different when in, say, cherry or walnut versus maple. So this is a pretty neat piece of walnut here. And we'll turn this around here and you can see it a little bit better. But maple and walnut, or excuse me, cherry and walnut, when they curl, it's usually a much broader curl. So it's kind of fat, you might say. So that's kind of pretty dramatic, that layer under the bark. I call that the cambium layer, I believe. So this is a pretty dramatic, pretty nice piece of walnut. Again, unplaned, so it doesn't show as well as it would once it's planed down. So even in maple, some curl will be wide and some curl will be narrow. So this is you can compare this board to the maple board that we talked about previously, and you can kind of see the difference in the curl. It's again, this is curl, so you're not looking at saw marks here, but you're looking at curl, and the number of stripes per length are much greater on this piece of wood, so it's much finer. We can maybe peel off a little bit of the bark here. It might be neat to see if it'll come off. Sometimes you have to fight it a little bit, sometimes you don't. That's a pretty good area there. Well, this one doesn't want to peel off quite as easily, but you can still see it. We're going to turn it around. So the frequency of the curl is a little higher on this particular board. And so, interestingly enough, some maple will have most of the amplitude or the form, I guess, of the curve in the quarter sawn direction, and some will have most of it in the slab sawn direction. Typically, the slab sawn direction will have the highest amount of amplitude to the curl and you'll get the strongest stripes. But there are some trees that'll show better figure in the slab sawn direction, which is pretty fascinating. It's pretty neat. One thing we always have to watch out for with stock blanks are bark inclusions. There's some bark inclusions there. So when we're laying out blanks to cut them out, we have to try to dodge all these little defects, you know, mark them out and dodge them. So that's kind of a quick summary of the maple stock wood for flintlock rifles, percussion rifles. We'll probably do a little demonstration of staining it because everybody likes to see nice pieces of wood stained, and then we'll wrap up the video. So thank you. Yeah, that won't be a bad one either. Okay. So we'll take a few minutes to talk about or to show some examples of some stock blanks that we've recently cut and to talk about them a little bit. So these blanks are red maple, you know, nicely curled blanks. They're 2 inches thick, which is thick enough for our mountain rifle. So that's what these will become. And if we get the light right, you'll really be able to see the curl. The curl is very, very strong on this wood. And it is hardwood and machines very well. So some red maple is very soft, not really suitable for a gun stock. Some can be very hard. It can overlap the hardness of sugar maple or hard maple. Silver maple is never suitable for a gun stock, so I wouldn't suggest it. And rarely is western maple, such as big leaf, suitable for a gun stock. The typical range is too soft. You might be able to find a piece here and there that's hard enough, but it's not typical. So let's just look at a couple of these pieces and see what they tell us. So this first one is kind of interesting. It says premium. So yeah, this is a very nice stock. One thing you can see from the start is the grain of the wood, the overall grain, not talking about the little squiggles in the curl, but the overall grain flows down the wrist of the gun and follows the profile of the gun. So this is what's commonly referred to as stump cut. So if you think about a tree, you generally have a flare or a bell near the ground. And that allows, in that flare or bell, the grain will follow that contour. So you can take advantage of that contour, you know, when cutting a stock blank out of a tree, if it's available, and you can get some awesome grain flow. So that makes the gun stock stronger, so the grain is more parallel through the wrist, and you often get more figure near the base of the tree, near the roots. And that's a form of figure called compression figure, which is a little different than figure that goes up the tree. It has to do with you know, the growth of the tree and you know, the kind of running out of room a little bit, I believe, in the growth layers that causes the wrinkling. So one thing I didn't mention is it's pretty much, you know, there's always been this debate on why some trees curl and some don't. Some maple trees do and some don't. And it's, I think, been pretty much proven that it's just a genetic condition. You can kind of compare it to curly hair in people. From what I understand, if you find one curly tree, you're more likely to find others in the general vicinity. And I believe that I was told, you know, back in the 60s that some people in Germany did work on trying to propagate curly trees for musical instrument use. So I think it's pretty much, that's just what it is. It has nothing to do with the wind or being grown in tough growing conditions and things like that. So it's a genetic characteristic from what I understand. So that the stump cut is a great characteristic. What else can we learn from this blank here? It has a little wormhole here, but that's going to be pretty insignificant. And you have to, one thing that we urge people to understand is that to find an absolute perfect board or perfect tree without any, or blank without any irregularity at all, can be difficult. They're out there, but it could be sometimes a little more difficult. And in the end, something like this little wormhole with this little bit of staining, it may machine completely out. There may be a remnant of it left, but it is of no consequence. So try to, you know, in regards to our kit business, try to understand that we know, you know, we know about our product, we understand stock wood, we're experts in it, and to trust us a little bit. Now, one other bit of information is this bark on this tree, and it kind of highlights a point where some of the wood we buy has live edge, and some of it has it's been edged or dimensioned. And live edge is so much nicer for us to work with because you can, well, I wouldn't say it's nicer to work with, but you can get so much more yield out of a log if it's not edged. So for gun stocks, there's absolutely no need to edge the boards because they're going to be profiled out anyway on a bandsaw. So we're able to utilize so much more of the tree. And along those lines, one thing we do is we make our blanks small. So you can see, this is a small stock blank. And even you can see the pattern on here. We still cut, in this case, quite a bit over the pattern because we had the room. Sometimes it'll be much tighter than this. We might be right up against the pattern. So that allows us to get a lot more yield. I get frustrated when I see stock suppliers that sell these big giant stock blanks, you know, and we'll probably get half again or maybe twice as much as they get sometimes. You know, maybe not twice, but at least half again as many blanks out of a log or out of a board. So that's something that to keep in mind too. Let's look at the next one here. It's again a nice strongly striped blank. Very nice figure. Not as much stump cut on it, but there's still decent grain flow through the wrist. It'll be just fine. This has just a wee bit here of a little darker material, and that's the beginnings of the heart. Now this heart isn't nasty. It's pretty not far from the color of the sapwood, and you can just tell that it's going to work fine, and a lot of that will go away too. We know based on how these are going to machine whether we can get away with a little bit in the blank and have it machine out. So that's one interesting bit about that. We didn't talk too much about quarter sawn versus slab sawn, but suffice it to say this is a quarter sawn blank. You can see how the growth rings come out the bottom of the stalk, and so it's near perfectly quarter sawn. And you usually get the very strong stripes in quarter sawn as opposed to flat sawn. You're going to get more of like a wavy type figure that's a little more irregular and not as linear. So this one here is going to be a quarter sawn one too, but the end is, well, you can see it through the paint here, so that's a nice one to look at. See how those growth rings are perpendicular to the face is what quarter sawn means. And slab sawn would be the opposite. So slab sawn or flat sawn, the growth rings would be parallel to the face. Okay, and finally the last blank I pulled out here shows a little bit about what we do to try to dodge defects. So this is, you can see there's a bit of a knot, so we have to dig into the blanks and try to see where they go and see, excuse me, not the blanks, but the boards, dig into the boards and see where they go in order to try to lay out the stock blanks so we can avoid defects. It can sometimes be a little tricky, but it's real important to maximizing the wood. You know, we like to maximize the wood because, you know, we like to save money, and also, you know, very nice stock wood is hard to find, and we hate to waste any of it. We'd like to, you know, utilize it as much as we can. So that kind of sums up the blanks a little bit. So here are some stocks that have been recently run out of some of the wood that we, same tree that we introduced in the other room there. You can see how beautiful it is. There's just a gorgeous stock. It has that same stump cut profile. You can see this side. Just wonderful. High amplitude curl, very strong figure. Here's another one out of the same tree. Very nice stock. Super wood. And then the tree that had the finer figure, here's some examples of it. Let me get one of those. Here's that finer curl. Sometimes you have to play it in the light to get it to show up the best. I'm going to turn it like this. You'll probably see it like this if you shoot from that angle. So beautiful stock there. What else here? Here's a little bit, another one of the wider figure, the real high rise curl. Very pretty. Look at one more here and then move on. Here's another one of the finer curl. I'm not sure how that's showing up, but I'll turn this light. Maybe it'll help it, maybe it'll hurt it, I don't know. Okay, we'll wrap this video up with doing a little demonstration of staining like we mentioned, so that'll be coming next.
Hi, I'm Lorie. If you've ever called on the phone here at Kibler's, I'm sure you've talked to me before, but I'm going to show you how to stain a stock with iron nitrate. And we're going to use this stock. It's actually really fancy curly. It's one of our more premium stocks, but when it got run on the machine, it got destroyed, so we're just going to use it as our practice stock. I went ahead and I sanded it first with 150 grit sandpaper. Then I wet it down, and then I let it dry, and I sanded it with 220 grit sandpaper. Then I wet it down and let it dry, and I finished it with 320 grit sandpaper. And so now we're going to get ready and stain it. So you just take, it's actually really easy. You just take the iron nitrate. You can put it on with anything, but this paper towel works just fine. And I just put some on there. Let's just start rubbing it on. It needs to be kind of a little bit wet. And it's going to turn a really, really horrible color as it dries. Then after we get it all put on there, we're going to let it dry all the way on. Usually like an hour or so. I think I let mine dry last time. It worked well. Okay, so the stain's on there, and it starts out this color, and then as it dries, it turns like a grayish, greenish, brown, ugly color. So we'll leave it sit and we'll leave it dry for a little bit. Okay, so now we've let the iron nitrate dry on here, and we're going to go ahead and use the heat gun to heat it up, and you'll see the different color. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the heat gun on. I'm going to turn it on high. And then as you notice, When you start, you'll notice a complete difference right there. It already started to turn. It turns it like a little bit orange. And then you'll see the stripes start to come out. And it doesn't take very long before it turns. And I will have to say that on the first time I tried this, I got a little bit too close and I burned it a little bit. So don't put this gun super close to the stock. Keep it moving and it'll be much better. Okay. Just check it and make sure you're happy with it. We think there needs to be a little bit more, maybe down along these edges. I think it needs to have some up in here too. There was a little bit in this little groove that I thought needed a little bit longer. What you would normally do is now put a second coat of iron nitrate on and then let it dry and then use the heat again and it'll get a lot more pretty, I say, but it's not as pretty as it's going to be yet. So to make it really, really pretty, you're going to have to put on some finish oil. And we're going to use tried and true. We're just going to put it on because it made my stock just a tiny bit rough when I put that wet. So if you use some Scotch-Brite, that will kind of sand it again while you're putting it on, and it'll smooth it back up. And it says the more you rub with the oil, the prettier it'll get. And you're supposed to just use a really light coat of this stuff, so a little bit will go a long way. I'm going to try to even it out now that I got it all on there. Jim will come give us the final inspection. Oh, that did turn out really pretty. So, yeah. I might actually take some of this and wipe some of that extra off so it doesn't lay on there. And then the more coats of your finish you put on, the smoother and shinier it'll get. So that's how you do it.